Hello everybody. I'm going to finish off my solar system and deal with two of the larger puzzles that I have to solve here, which are the Sun and our good friend Saturn that's got a big ring around it. The first thing I want to do is get rid of Earth. I'm going to move it out of the way, and I got to be careful when I pick it. So I grab Earth's surface, the moon, the NURB circle that the moon is traveling on, and the clouds are all children to Earth's surface. So I got to move Earth's surface out of the way. And then I'm going to quickly just add a sphere. Now, if you hold down the Shift key and right click in the viewport, with everything deselected, Shift and right click, you can get a different kind of wheel pop up. And it allows you to add some polygonal data, some shapes really, really fast. I'm going to hop into the attribute editor and just give it a good name, Sun. And right click, assign a new material, and make sure I'm using an AI standard surface. And right away, I'm just going to give it a good name. That is my M underscore Sun. And make sure that my subdivisions are 10 and 10. I've been saying that repeatedly, so from now on, I'm not going to say it again. Just make sure you reduce your subdivisions whenever you build a new planet. Okay, so it's got a texture applied, it's got great names. I can get rid of this node here by just clicking on the delete history button up here. Very important. And that gets our nodes nice and clean. I'm going to save the scene while I can. Tap the 3 key, and then on the material Sun, I'm going to load the file that is the Sun texture. And I've done this a couple times, so every time I do it, it gets a little bit quicker, and that's fantastic. The issue with the Sun is we need to make sure that we can see the texture from all angles, because the Sun is a real big old ball of fire, really, and it's emanating light in every direction. So in other words, it cannot receive shadows. And the way we need to do that is to make this almost like a lampshade, like when you hold paper up to the light and you let light go on through it. And there's a clever way to do that so that we can still see the texture, and it will actually emit the color of the image that's wrapped around the sphere, which is great. First of all, though, I need to create a light that surrounds the sphere. And once again, Shift and right click and quickly add a sphere. I'm going to reduce its geometry to 10 by 10 and scale it up. I don't know, I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. It's not a big deal. I can just do that with my eye. And make sure I give it a good name. So this is going to be my Sun, and this is going to be its outer light. So there's going to be light on the inside of the Sun that actually lights up the texture. You'll see that here in a minute. So Arnold lights, I'm going to switch that over to a mesh light and save my file, because I've been having some crashing problems when I hit the render button. And I need to give this a little bit more intensity. I'm guessing about 100, and Arnold render. See if it gives me a product. It does. Nice. I can see the Earth over there. It's not bright, so I might pump that up to, say, 300 and render that again. Cool. As long as I can see what's going on out there. But the problem is this light source is not sending any lighting information inwards towards the surface of the Sun. So a helpful tip, if you tap the H key, when you highlight an object, tap H, it will hide it. And then you'll see over here, it will actually be grayed out. So that light now is grayed out here under the default light set, as well as under the Sun outer light. So if you want to show it again, you just highlight it and tap Shift H, and that will unhide it. So H to hide it, select it from outliner, Shift H to show it again. So let's hide it, H. Then I'm going to build another sphere. Deselect everything by clicking out in the light gray area. Shift, right click, make another sphere. This time I'm going to make it smaller to be inside of my Sun. And this is where I might want to switch over to wireframe view. And that's just this button up here. So we can go from seeing the actual texture geometry to just seeing the wireframe. Just so that I can see that the sphere is on the inside, and call that my sun inner light. Sun underscore inner light. And its job is going to be to push light out to illuminate the surface of the sun shader when we set it up to do so. And once more, drop that down, 10, 10. I don't need to subdivide it. Good thing I can grab it over here in my outliner. And if you can't see your outliner, it's under Windows. Very important to be able to grab that. So outliner is over there. Okay, so let's go back to textured view. And if I hit render right now, it's still going to be completely black because there is no opacity through this object. There's a couple of ways that we can do this. In Hypershade, we can use what's called subsurface scattering. That's one way to do it. Or there's a less expensive way for the renderer to handle this, and that is to utilize this awesome feature down here called geometry. And all we need to do is set it up to be thin-walled. That's the sun object. And then we'll just decrease the opacity just a little bit. We don't want to see through the sun completely, so we don't want to turn that down a lot. And if we turned it down all the way, then we would completely see through the object. But now we're just allowing a little bit of light to go through the thin wall of that texture. I gotta be careful. What am I looking at here? Mars. I don't need the Mars texture. These tiny little thumbnails, and you can actually increase and decrease the size of your thumbnails if you want under view. So I'm going to look at medium swatches. I'm messing around with the wrong shader here. That's my Mars shader. I'm kind of far ahead, so I'm going to turn that off. Get my opacity back up because Mars doesn't need this. It's the sun that does. So I'm going to right click on that and graph that network. Make sure you're working on the right shader. Okay, good. You want to grab the main node here, the actual AI standard surface, and we'll turn thin-walled on here and turn that down just a little bit like so. And that should, in theory, allow for the light on the inside of the sun to begin to illuminate the texture itself. So if I grab that inner light here, and I haven't converted it yet, I'm going to go up to Arnold, Lights, Mesh Light, like so, and then give it some intensity, maybe 50? I'm not sure. We will find out here in a second. This might crash, so let's save that scene. Arnold, render, we'll see what's going on here. Awesome. That's exactly what I want to see. So let's just sort of break down the anatomy of what's going on here. I've got an outer light that's pushing light. I've got it hidden right now. That's why it didn't illuminate the Earth. It's dark gray, so I'm going to highlight that and actually turn it back on. Shift H to unhide it. So we've got an outer light that is responsible for pushing lumens in every direction out into space. That will lighten the Earth over here. And then we've got an inner light here. We can't see it because it's actually on the inside of the sun object. If I switch over to wireframe mode, then we will see that there is indeed another shape on the inside of our Earth. So I've got an outer light and an inner light. And that inside light, its only job is to light up the texture that is on the surface. Cool. Now if I turn on textures and lighting, then I should be able to see what's going on. Now the viewport's not going to actually render that for me, so it's going to leave the sun looking dark unless I switch over to renderer Arnold, but this is expensive on the system. When I hit play, I'll actually see it render in the viewport here. So from time to time, you might want to leave that open, shut it off, just to see what's going on. When you get to animation, one thing to keep in mind is that there are a lot of different modes up here to look at your work. So for example, if you just want to look at the geometry lit, you might want to turn that button here on, which sort of shows untextured stuff. And you're not going to see light on the sun because this viewport type doesn't allow for this fancy interior light to show the sun. So it's just going to look black in that situation. Yeah, but if we switch over to textured view, like this, yeah, see what's going on? It just looks like the texture is just fine. Cool, so at least we can see what's going on. We just can't see what's going on the inside of that object. Now, I want to be able to move all of these things together and scale them up. So they're going to stay at 0, 0, 0, where the dark lines in the grid cross. And you can look at that from, you know, the transform attributes. The translate is 0, 0, 0. It's X, Y, Z is there. And that's where the sun is going to live. And that's awesome. We don't need to parent these together. We could right click on them and, you know, group them together if we wanted to. But chances are we can just click and drag a box around the sun and scale everything up as a group that way. We don't necessarily need to parent them to one another. I'm just going to make that a little bit bigger. File save. And then Arnold render and see what's going on there. I think this is probably going to begin to take care of my sun. The light on the inside needs a little bit more power. So I'm just going to crank up its intensity to 100. And as we move through this scene, we're going to come back into lighting and really fix all of this stuff up. So don't get too carried away right now with how your lighting works. We're going to come back into that and balance everything out in the long run. So I think that actually takes care of my sun object. Now I'm going to grab all these things and with my W move, I'm going to shove it out of the way and I'm going to move on to Saturn. Saturn's an interesting puzzle. I'm going to drop in a sphere here. I'm going to sort of do that the hardcore way. I'm just going to close my attribute editor for now. And I'm just going to shift right click and I'm add another sphere. And I'm going to right click on it and assign my favorite material, AI standard surface. And this is going to be called Saturn. 1010, practice, practice, practice. Highlight, click the 3 key and call this M_Saturn. Now, frustrating, it's calling it M_Saturn1. That is because I already have a material in my Hypershade library because I've gone ahead and done all of this work already. So since I've already got that created, and that's cool that I do, I'm just going to right click and I'm going to assign an existing material. And this is why it's so important to name your stuff. So M_Saturn. I've already got one here. And that should give me the texture that I need. And it is just literally a file node. That's all it is. Nothing fancy, just a file here on the color channel, and that is that. Now I might go into Hypershade right now and just take a look around and sort of clean up my act a little bit. Because I accidentally created another material. So it's not in use right now, so I can highlight it and delete it. And I've got another one here called Saturn Rings, and I'm just going to get rid of that too, because I want to recreate that here in this tutorial. So just a little power tip, you can always go in and, you know, delete your materials and clean stuff up. Cool. I'm going to push the actual planet out of the way so I can focus on the next move here, which is going to be the rings. And I think it's critical right now that we get some inspiration. So I'm going to look at Saturn on Google Images and learn a little bit from what we can see out there. Now, that's a beautiful picture. I'm just going to keep this up in the background here. just so that I can see what it looks like. Very hard shadows, interesting. Very hard shadows. That's going to become important later. Okay, so how do I make a ring? Interesting challenge. So there's, more than one way to do the exact same thing in 3D. My first instinct was to throw out a disk and then, go to edge mode, double click on the edge so I could select the whole area. And this is really cool. When you select anything and you hold down the shift key and mouse over these little gimbal handles, you'll see it says extrude, which is so nice. And you can do that with like any of the transforms. So R, and it's kind of weird right now because I don't know why my my rotate gimbal is hanging out over here and not where I want it in the center. So if that's the case, and I won't do it the hardcore way, you can double click on the scale tool over here at any point in time, and you can just reset. Press the reset button. That's not working. I don't know why it's not resetting. And I should double check what is its axis orientation. Let's make that to the world. And if I press reset the tool, there's the button. Reset that tool. Nope, not going to do it. Go to object mode. And we're seeing that the gimbal is actually sitting in the center. Let me go back to edge mode and fight with this a little bit. Now, this is where knowing how to work with your pivots is so important. If this is a problem, you can always tap the D key and move your stuff around like so. And I could try to eyeball this back to the center, but I've got a grid that I'm working off of here, which is awesome. So if I hold down the if I hold down the X button, you'll see that square will turn to a circle and it will start to snap to the grid. And this works for everything in Maya. When you're moving stuff around, if you hold down X, it will snap to the grid, which is awesome. Or if you notice that I'm orbiting my mouse out here, where it says the word reset, I can just click and it'll reset it back to its original position. I'm not sure why it thinks the edge center should be there, but it doesn't matter because I can always just hold down X and drag it to snap to the grid. Press D, and now I can scale it, and perfect, that's what I want. So now that it's centered to the edges, the edge loop, I can hold down the shift key, and you'll see the word extrude pop up whenever I hold shift. Now I've got the scale tool on, I hold shift, and then I can extrude it out. Now that was what I thought might be the first solution. I'll go back to faces mode, show you another powerful tip. Selection is Q. Oh, I know what's going on. Look at how my poly selection's going. I've got symmetry turned on right now. So let me just right click, shift, command right click, symmetry. I'm going to turn that off. Okay, there we go. Symmetry is now off. So there's a really powerful tip when you're trying to select faces, and I want to delete all the ones out of the center here. You can always hold down the tab key and just paint a selection. You can do this with edges, you can do this with vertices, so you can just paint, paint, paint. It's just a fun, quick way to select things. Press delete. Cool. Now I thought that would be awesome. If I go back to edge mode, and I double click in here, I can now scale. If I press the R key, I can scale that in and out. I can go on the exterior edge loop and do the same there. That's great. But the problem with this is the UVs. And I encourage people when you're modeling, just always when you're making something, just take a peek over here from time to time and look at your UVs. Because the way I did it with this extrusion, it just decided to stack all of the polygon faces on top of each other. And I could fight an uphill battle right now to try to make it perfect, but there might be a better way. There's always 3 or 4 different ways, 10 different ways to do the same thing in 3D. So I'm actually going to go into object mode and blow this away. That was one approach I thought would work. Maybe, this object might have worked, but it led to the same problem when I tried to extrude the bottom faces or the bottom edges. But I landed on this one, and this is actually kind of a weird solution. I used a toroid because the UVs on a torus are perfectly laid out, like they're perfectly square. Now, in order for this to work, I really only need one of these rings. Now, I could try to select these. Well, heck, I can. With my select tool, holding down the tab button, I just need one of these rings. Whoop, tab. Oh, let's go into faces mode. There we go. And then I'm just going to carefully make a ring around like this. Not easy. I found selecting them from the isometric view to be easier, but hey, perfect. That was fun. Got it. All right, so then I can select the inverse faces and then press the delete key. Select the inverse and then delete it. The problem with this is I want this to be perfectly flat. I don't want this hump, and it's currently got some curvature to it. Let me double check the UVs. Nice, that's exactly what I want. I don't have to unfold anything when I'm trying to make this work. Perfect. But I do want this to be flattened out. So back to what I said earlier about that X key. I'm going to take a look at this from a different view, from an isometric view here. And get into my quad view. What would be a good view? This one's a little bit confusing. It's okay. I can select the object. I'm working with edges. And if I double click on this edge, which is the lower, and I go to my W move key, and I drag it like so, well, that point of orientation is kind of in a weird place. But if I hold down the X key, what happens? What about I gotta move now. This is problematic. Something's going on with my pivot point. So I wonder, can I reset the tool? Can I reset the pivot point? There we go. Yeah, press reset on the pivot. There we go. Now it's in the exact position that I need. That's what I should have done earlier, actually, was the reset the pivot. So I can move it up and down and try to eyeball it. That's not gonna work. But don't forget that you have snapping tools up here. And I'm pressing the X key, and you'll see that this will highlight, snap to grid. C will snap to path, and V will snap to vertice. Very cool. X, C, and V. X, C, and V. Very powerful. Because when I'm holding down X, I can snap it down now to the ground. I can double click on this edge loop up here, hold X, and snap it to the ground, and it's perfectly flat. Let's go back into perspective view. And now I can start modeling it by shrinking it in like so. Just double click on that outer loop and bring it in. And we just stole a polygon edge loop from a polygon loop from a torus to make this object. And because it was created that way, our UVs are perfectly flat and exactly what we need to now install this texture over here. My rings, very interesting that they're flat, and somehow we got to wrap them all the way around. But because our UVs are already straightened out like this, when we add the texture to this, let me just right click, assign my favorite material. Got some work to do here. All these are bad names. So let me get in here. I'm going to delete my history. My modeling is done. Object mode, make sure I'm in object mode, perfect. It's not a p-torus. You are my Saturn ring. And you are an M_Saturn ring, keeping the names the same so I can always remember. Load my color channel on, File, and Textures. Let me grab that Saturn ring alpha. And now it's all funky, right? It's going all over the place. Power tip, if you're having a difficult time seeing in your viewport, you can switch this mode to untone mapped, and it brightens up things just a little bit, changes the color management just a little bit. But it's all stretched and weird. So let's highlight the object, go into our UV editor, and start thinking about how we can map this on. So I'm going to grab the entire UV shell. I'm going to grab it. I'm going to move it just a bit. I can move it all over the place. So W, E, and R still do the same thing. E, rotate, R, scale. So E, first things first, I'm going to rotate it, but I'm going to hold down the J key, the J for Jackson key, and that snaps things when we're rotating. And things are starting to warp quite nicely in the right direction. Now, if I look back at my image, I can see that that darkest ring is actually on the outside of Saturn's ring. And I'm just going to double check other images. Yep, that looks good. Outside, it's on the outside. Cool. So maybe when I start to scale this up, I'm going to keep that in mind. So I'm going to move it. And then with the R button, I'm going to start scaling this to fit all across that texture. I'm going to click and drag a few times. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And then just to finish things off, I think that's looking good. I mean, it looks a little bit funky right now because all of these polygons, albeit slightly skewed in different directions, they're not smooth. So when I tap the 3 key, when I highlight this in object mode, tap the 3 key, it smooths out the object, and that's going to also smooth the texture into a perfect ring. Awesome. I'm going to save this in case I crash in the next move here. All right, so that is pretty much the UVs dealt with. The modeling is complete. We've got a beautiful looking ring. Awesome. Now, the rings of Saturn actually have some transparency to them. So I'm going to hop into my Hypershade and start thinking about that puzzle. Make sure I'm working on the right one. Saturn's ring, right click, graph the network. And I'm going to pump into the opacity channel over here. I'm going to look at that geometry again and that opacity channel. I'm going to pump in the same texture, the exact same file. Potentially we can use the values from it to do the work that we need to actually see through the rings. So I'm going to switch that over. I'm going to add that in, the ring alpha. And it looks very, very invisible right now. It's very, very see-through. So here's a power tip. The file nodes themselves, and first things first, I need to set that to utility raw. I'm going to set that to raw. That might fix up stuff a little bit, not much, but the file itself, when I highlight the node and look carefully over here at the color balance, I can do a lot of work without using a color corrector node to change its exposure, color, alpha gain, all these different things. So maybe if I lighten and darken the exposure, I might get a different result. Yeah, I'm just changing the exposure here. I'm getting a really cool result up here. Now, in context, what does that look like? Now I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. I'm going to actually grab the model of the Saturn itself, and I'm going to put it back at 0, 0, 0. I could try to eyeball that. That would drive me a little bit nuts, I'm just going to type in 0, 0, 0. And I'm just going to grab the rings and scale those up with the R key in object mode, of course. And I notice that this has a little tilt to it. Saturn always has this little, 20-degree tilt. And I might add that in now. Might as well do that. First things first, I want to be able to move this and have the rings go with it. So I'm going to grab this object with the select tool, shift button, click on the rings, and under the animation drop down here, we can now constrain parent. And when I move Saturn, it's going to take the rings with it. Perfect. Awesome. Because the rings are a child object to Saturn, they're independent. So actually when I scale the children, it doesn't affect the parent. That's an important thing to note. So that we can still mess around with the size of the rings as things move through here, this project here. So let me just grab the object in relation to the rest of the planets, and I'm just going to just give it a little tilt. Cool. Very cool. And I'm going to need something behind the rings just to see what the transparency is doing. So I'm going to add me a sphere. I'm going to move it over and down just so that there's something behind that. And I'm just going to throw in a new Arnold shader. And I'm not going to mess around with naming it because I'm going to delete these later. I'm just going to make it a white, bright, shiny object. I might even take its roughness all the way down so that it's really shiny. Now, I don't think this has got a lot of light on it right now. And I don't have in my scene any kind of area lighting. So I'm just going to throw in, for now, I'll take it out in just a second. I just want to see what's going on here. I'm going to throw in a Skydome Light and file save. I'm going to save the scene every time I go up to Arnold render because this is where I crash. Now that's a really bright skylight back there, and we're in space, so let me just take the intensity of the Skydome Light down. I'm just trying to test to see if that transparency is working. Arnold render. And I'm not seeing through the rings. I should see through the rings. I want to see that sphere behind it. So powerful tip, I'm going to keep the Arnold render view open here. I'm not even going to go into Hypershade. I'm going to hunt down for this object known as Saturn ring. I'm going to hunt down in the material, the file node. And I could just do that right through Attribute Editor. So I think that was under Geometry. It's got a file node loaded in. If I double click, just simply click on that little button there, that will go into the node. And we're back to the color balance area where we messed around before. So we can do all that through the Attribute Editor without accessing Hypershade. It's nice to have it over there. And with real-time Arnold rendering over here, I can just start to make some choices like so and see it in real time, influencing what's happening. So it was defaulted at 0 exposure for that file, and it's barely visible. So I'm just going to pump its exposure up. And you can play around with these all you want, just remember what their default settings were so that you don't, get yourself in trouble. Default gain, the color offset, that might help a little bit. No, it's cooking it out. I think exposure at 2 might be really good. Now it looks washed out and really not very good right now because of that big old light in the background. So if I highlight that and delete it and now do an Arnold render, I just got rid of the skylight back there. Ooh, dark and ominous. Very dark and ominous. So let me grab this guy. I'm just going to duplicate it. That's cool. When I'm in object mode, shift key, drag, you can clone an object. That's really great. I'm going to turn that just for the purposes of my demo. In my preview, I'm going to turn that into an Arnold light, mesh light. I'm going to turn on my renderer again. And now with that object selected, that light, I'm going to delete that in a minute. I'm just using it to test. I'm going to start amping up its intensity to see what's going on. 20. That's pretty. That is really pretty. You might not know this, but in the actual Arnold render view, you can click on objects and it selects them. It selects them in the attribute editor, or in the system, I guess, in the software. So you can jump around and change your objects just by clicking on them here. So now that I'm looking at it with more kind of, how do I say, spacey lighting, I might go back into my material Saturn ring here, jump into my geometry, opacity, file, and then just mess around a little bit more with my exposure. Fun. Yeah, you get a lot of cool effects. The alpha gain is looking really cool there when I mess around with that. Now, I've said it before, I'll say it again, it's best to just leave this well enough alone right now. I think it looks really great, and I'm going to come back into it later on when I start tweaking the final settings. What's important now is that I have the rings modeled and textured, and that is, looking great. Earth's looking great, my moon's looking great, and I can get rid of this light just sort of hanging out here now. I'm just going to delete that and just double check inside my outliner and look at all these things that I have. Make sure they all have great names. Who's P-Sphere 1? Why do I have P-Sphere 1? Who are you? P-Sphere 1. Well, I may as well get on with it. Who's left in the old solar system? We've got a Neptune. May as well just make this one Neptune. And if you look at the textures, you'll notice that they don't, not all of them have complex sets of textures like Earth has got, clouds and day map and night map. We still got to come back to the night map. But things like Saturn, it's a single image, no big deal. Moon's a single image, Mercury, Mars, single image, Jupiter's a single image. So there's only one that's weird, and that's Venus's atmosphere. They've included that for some reason, but I think that's the only Venus. There's Venus surface and Venus atmosphere. So if you want, you can do the same thing you did with the Earth clouds and try to play around with the Venus atmosphere and put that on top. Yeah, so let's double check. I am going into an older file that I had further along, so let me just check my Hypershade and see what I got already done. I've got these AI standard surfaces. I'm going to delete them. They're bad news. I'm just going to get them out of my collection because if they're not called M underscore, then I don't need them. So I got Saturn, Saturn, Moon, Mars. I've already got Mars done. I modeled that in another version of this file, and it's hanging out. So file, I'm going to file save. And this is saying, hey buddy, I'm green now. Why am I green? Because I just deleted an AI standard surface that I hadn't named yet. So it's gone. It's like, I don't know what to do. So Neptune shape. Let's make sure you're 10 and 10. And I'm going to assign an existing material to you. Do I have Neptune? No, I don't. So right click, and I'm going to assign a new material because I don't have Neptune done yet. AI standard surface. And immediately tap the 3 key. Look at that egg shape. Why are you egg shaped? You look funny. Why does that look funny to me? It's just my eyes. I've been looking at spheres for too long. Looked squished. Anyway, so Neptune. Let's give you a good name. M_Neptune. And this is the fun and easy fast part. Color, file. You're pros at this by now. Image name. Grab that texture known as Neptune. You're in here somewhere. Do I not have a Neptune? Did I just invent a planet? Why don't I have Neptune? Oh, there you are. These are not, oh yeah, it's the numbering system that's causing them not to be in numbered orders. That's cool. 2K Neptune. Oh, that's a pretty blue planet. Now, one thing I want to keep in mind is that my roughness for planets, I'm going to go with 0.8 for all of my planets, except for Earth. Earth's got its own weird sort of situation going on. And it's sort of hanging out in weird translation space right now, so I'm just going to put it back to 0, 0, 0 before I lose its x-axis, its x-order, because it got kind of pushed around. Cool, so that's Neptune. Who's next on the docket? I've already got Mars material baked up, so I'm going to use that next. So I'm going to shift right click. Whoops, I've got something selected. Deselect everything, shift right click, sphere. Shame old thing. Now maybe I'm going to save myself some time here. Watch this. Mars. And I'm going to set this up with 1010. Now I know I'm going to need a bunch more of these. I'm going to push Neptune out of the way. Get out of there, Neptune. I know I'm going to need a bunch more of these, and they're perfectly modeled. They're going to have, oops, I keep pushing the wrong movie button. Right click, I'm going to assign that AI standard surface and tap the 3 key to smooth it out. And it's Mars shape. I can delete its history, get rid of that. Mars shape. Perfect. And then I'm going to call this, I have this already created, so I'm going to assign an existing material. I baked this up before. So there's Mars. But watch this move. I don't want to do that 10-10 thing anymore where I have to change the subdivisions. I need a few more planets. So I'm going to clone this out. Shift, drag. Now I got a new Mars, Mars 1. And then if I press Shift D, magic. It starts building an array of these things. Now I got to be really careful with what I'm about to do here because I don't want to get confused. I mean, I just made a whole bunch of Marses. I've got in myself a Neptune. I've got myself a Mars. So I'm going to move on. And since this has got perfect geometry now, I'm going to actually change its name to the next planet. We got a Neptune, Uranus. Let's go with that one. Uranus. That just changed its name. Cool. I keep doing that. So I'm going to actually assign a new material to what used to be Mars. This is going to make it quicker. And it's going to be called M_Uranus. Saved some time. Didn't have to remodel that. That's awesome. And color channel, file, fast Uranus. Where are ya? Where are ya, buddy? There you go. Cool. Who's next on the list? Venus. Let's get ourselves a Venus going. So Mars 2, you're not Mars 2, you're actually going to now be Venus. And new material, right click, assign a new material, AI standard, and you're going to be called M_Venus. I'm your Venus. I'm your fire, your desire. Ooh, I'm old. All right, so Venus atmosphere and Venus surface. Let's go with Venus surface for this one. File fast. Texture, Venus surface. Where are ya? Venus surface. Nice. What are you? You're another Mars? Who are you? You're Mars. You're Mars 3. No, you're not. You're going to become Jupiter. All right. So Mars 3, you're not Mars 3, you're actually Jupiter. And I'm going to assign a new material to you. And one of the reasons I love this assignment, practice, practice, practice. Just like playing the piano. Your M_Jupiter. Load in that file. And just for fun, once we start to see the surface of Jupiter here, where are you, Jupiter? I'm going to start thinking about scale. Because Jupiter's a monster. Just a monster. So are you, Sun. You're a monster too. Just having some fun. All right, get Jupiter out of the way. Who's left? Who's left? Take a look at the list. Jupiter, we got a Mars, Mercury. Do we have a Mercury? Do we have a Mercury in here? Did we not create a Mercury? I'm just going to hold down Shift with the Move tool and clone that out. Steal Uranus. And we're looking at the Mercury here. Mercury. And with that, I'm going to assign me a new material. M_Mercury. Nice. Get in that color channel file. Beep. Now there's something I could have been doing the whole time that I'm going to have to go back and fix. Mercury. Well, you're a weird little planet. Mercury. You're weird. I shouldn't make fun of. You're not much of a planet at all. You look like a moon. Did I load the right thing in there? I haven't looked at Mercury lately. Yeah, mercury.jpg. Let's load that in again. Yep, it's just a bumpy, lumpy rock in space. You didn't get any color. You're a sad planet. You are a sad planet. File save. Let's get us save that up. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. I think we got it. Nice. Now for homework, what I'm asking everybody to do. Oh yes, before I go there. I'm going to highlight my objects and just look at my roughness. 0.8. Roughness on Jupiter is 0.8. And you can pick a different number, but I just don't want these things to look like pool balls. I don't want them to look all shiny. Earth's got its own situation. It's got its own puzzle with its roughness, so we'll just leave it as is. Our good friend Neptune's hanging out there. 0.8 roughness. You're going to be one shiny, lonely rock. Mercury, 0.8, file save, scene. Earth's good. Sun, what about good old Sun? It does not have to have any specularity. And somebody pointed that out in class today, that they saw this weird ring circle on the inside, and it was really the light shining from the inside. So we're going to turn that roughness to 1. The sun is really just flame. So I think we got it. Now, there's interesting moments that we can muck around with, like I could steal the moon. Can I steal the moon? Yeah, let's just steal the moon. Shift and clone it. Ooh, I just stole the moon. And this is now called Moon 1. So I'm going to leave the same texture on it because what the heck? I have no textures for any of the other moons, but I know that Saturn's got a couple, so it'd be kind of cool if Saturn got a moon or two. You know, it's just sort of hanging out there being a little guy. And I'm just going to call that, not Moon 1, but I'm going to call that Saturn Moon 1. And I duplicate this with Shift. I'm going to clone it over here. I'm going to call that, it automatically called it Saturn Moon 2. Love it. And then I can say U, Shift, click on that moon and that moon. Animation up here, constrain parent. So now when I move this around, the rings move and the moons move. What's wrong with you, moon? Something's gone weird. Multi-select parenting doesn't seem to want to work too good, I've seen. Let me just try a single moon. I'm undoing, undo, 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 undo. Let's try that again. U and Shift U, constrain parent. Now when I move Saturn, yeah, it seems to go weird. I saw that in class today when I select multiple objects. So let's try it when I duplicate this again. Let's throw it out here. Maybe just give it a little weird position. Go down. And they're smaller than that out there in space. I just want them to be little details. Little details. So there's the new one that I made. So if I grab Saturn and Shift click on that one, constrain parent. Now is it going to be good? Yeah, perfecto. Cool. Cool, cool. Now what's great is with this X key, I can snap to the grid, remember? And I don't really care if this is all perfectly lined up in their order yet. I just want to see for homework that you've done all of this texturing and that we're all caught up. And I know that these things are at different scales, so if you want to play around with that now, you can. That would be fine. And these are not to any kind of scientific scale. It doesn't matter to me right now. I just want to be able to see them all in a render. So I'm going to line them all up along this axis here. And to do that, I can hold down the X key. And I'm going to carefully grab that little green, that's going to constrain, that little green square. It turns yellow when I mouse over it. I'm going to constrain it down onto the floor. And I'm going to hold down the X key and snap it into place. The next one, snap it into place. Turns yellow, actually. Snap them all into place. I'm holding down the X key to do this snapping. I just want them all lined up. Saturn, you're going to need some room, buddy. I'm going to get Jupiter out of the way. Make sure you grab the parent when you're doing this move. Hold down the X key, X and snap. You got to press and hold it before you do the move or else it doesn't work. I'll snap you out there. What about our good friend Earth? Let's make some room for Earth. We'll hang Jupiter way out there. Mercury, you can go way out there. And then be careful with Earth. It's very complicated. We got to grab Earth's surface because we got all these children and stuff. And I'm going to move that with the X button pressed. I'm going to snap it into place here. Maybe just give it a quick rotate. Best not do that yet because I do have animation going on here with the moon. So maybe I'll just pick a frame where I can see it all. Cool. And power tip for renderers out there. Pop open the Arnold render settings. Just take a peek in here. Yeah, I'm going to keep my camera AA. I'm going to make my anti-aliasing 5 for this. I'm going to leave it low, actually. It's not going to really matter for this assignment. Just to take a look at some things. So yeah, really important, check that image format. I want this to come out as a JPEG. I'm going to drop the quality. By default, it's set to 100, but I'm just going to drop it down to 70. Save some file size. It's not going to deteriorate the image quality too much. And I just put in 1920 by 1080 as my resolution. Cool. All right, I think I'm good. I'm going to leave the AA at 3. Everything else at 2. It's going to look fine. And back here, I've got myself, double check my outliner, make sure I've got myself my Skydome Light. I'm going to make sure that's nice and bright. And I've currently got it set to an intensity of 0.5. I think that should do. And my light sun outer, I did have a crash, and this is a restart of the tutorial. So I have pumped up the internal light inside of my, or outside of my sun to 8,000. And let's just take a look at what that render looks like. It's good. It's going to need a lot of work with the lighting. And obviously in the final render, the backplate doesn't have to be gray. We're going to replace that with a star field and some galaxies maybe. We're going to have some fun. Save that up. But the power tip I was going to show you, if you don't really know what the renderer is going to show you in the viewport, under camera settings, you can turn on safe action, and that will give you a box. And that shows you where the render is actually going to take place. So you might want to reframe your image. So that's going to be 1920 by 1080. And that is awesome. Let's fire that up into Arnold. We'll do a render. And I'll just briefly talk about some of the issues with color. By default, when we go to save an image, our options might be set to, color management is disabled, or today in class I was messing around with these settings just to see what these different looks would be. I'm going to try to get it out as an ACES sRGB image, and watch what happens when I save this image out. I'm just going to put this out as a test. This is going into my images folder. I've got that open over here. So this test image is darker than what I want. So I'm going to have to make another tutorial about the ACES color workflow. But for now, all you need to do, save image options, go to 8-bit format only, and make sure that you apply the gamma and exposure. See what that does. Book. And then file save. And I'll do this as test 2 because you never know. And double check. Et voila. Looking much better. It's not fantastic color, but it is good for now. And this is perfectly good for the assignment. And we'll get into the ACES color workflow a little bit later on in this project, just to make sure that all of the color is super gorgeous. And while I'm at it, I mean, if that's what I'm going to be handing in, I may as well give it a really great name. So this is, Kevin Element, and this is going to be in class 6. Use that camel casing where I can. Makes it easier for me to read. And that's what I need submitted to Blackboard. that render right there. Proof positive that you've modeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 planets and one big old sun. We've even got some satellites hanging out around Saturn. That's cool. Jupiter's got 78 moons. Earth's only got one. I think we got ripped off. Anyway, everybody have fun. I'm really enjoying this process, and we're going to get into part 3 soon, where we actually start to make this look super real and get maybe some flames going on the sun, and yeah, get all of these things orbiting around. Happy modeling, happy texturing, and happy animating. And don't forget to save those files.